Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back with us our good friend Wallace Henley. And he is one of the pastors on staff there at the beautiful Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, where they run thousands through there every week. And he writes for the Christian Post. And the book that I think has kind of rocked everything that he's authored, and he's authored several books. You need Globequake. That's a great one to read. In fact, I just finished reading it for the second time. And then God and Churchill. What a wonderful, wonderful book. In fact, you can go to godandchurchill.com. It's a website. We'll talk about that coming up in just a moment. Wallace, good to see you, my bud. How you doing?
It's great to be with you, Perry. Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Well, listen, you have taken this God and Churchill thing to a whole new level on a presentation called Lead Like Churchill. Where are you going with this?
Well, it turns out that after all the research that we did for the book God and Churchill, there was a huge amount of information that we were not able to include in that book. In fact, we have over 500 footnotes in that book. So there's a lot of research data, and most of that dealt with how Churchill became the greatest leader of the 20th century, the secrets behind his leadership abilities. And so we are turning that now into a book that will be out sometime next year. But in the meantime, we're doing workshops and conferences and presentations all over the place on Lead Like Churchill. So it's a very exciting time following that initial phase of publication.
All right, let me skip ahead a little bit. So is most of this information at the God and Churchill website?
No, this is brand new information. People desiring more specific information can contact me directly, Wallace at wallacehenley.com, Wallace at wallacehenley.com, and I can give more specific information about the workshops that are available right now.
All right, so who are you targeting, individuals or churches?
We're targeting individuals. We're targeting a broad audience, but it's always the biblical worldview is crucial, as it was in the manifestation of his leadership. So it was crucial in the making of his leadership. And so we still focus very much on that. It's not a religious book by any means, but it's for leaders of all kinds. And it's also for people who are being shaped into leaders, because one of the questions we deal with is, are leaders born or made? And we get into this very deeply in the book and in the presentations.
Hey, by the way, I understand you made this presentation in Southern California. How'd it go?
Very, very well. We sort of premiered this at the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church down in Newport Beach, California, a church of about 2,000-3,000 people. It was an amazing experience. And then we took it into a CEO conference the next week, also in Newport Beach. And now we've begun moving around throughout the country. Sometimes Jonathan and I, my co-author, his great-grandson, sometimes we do the conference together, and sometimes we do it individually. He's right now in Missouri. I was in San Antonio last weekend. And so we're moving about the country with this tremendously good news about how leaders are made.
Well, I'm really excited about this. I've got to get you up here to do it. But walk us through this a little bit, Wallace, about what's the presentation. We're not giving it all away, but walk us through a little bit of this.
Well, we start by asking the question, are leaders born or made? There are many people who believe that leaders are born, that if you don't have those qualities, you'll never become a leader. But almost all of us are thrust into situations where we have to give leadership, either as a parent or in some other capacity, maybe at work. So we have to develop those leadership capacities. And one of the things that we point out in the book is that even if you had asked Winston Churchill when he was just a young man, do you have leadership capacities? He had no confidence in himself. His father had no confidence in him. So no leadership qualities in him at all. And so consequently, the question comes to the fore, then how did this man become such a great leader? Those are the questions that we pursue and that we answer in the book.
You deal a lot with his faith in the book, and I think it comes to the surprise of many as revisionists have tried to not make him a man of faith, but he was deeply much a man of faith. And I find that parallel interesting, Wallace, because I just finished another book on Reagan, And Reagan had that deep, abiding faith that he got from his mother, and Churchill got it from his nanny. And that ends up being the core of what good leadership is, right?
All of our function, all of our action arises from our being. What is at the being determines the quality of the leadership that is given. And it was Elizabeth Everest, this incredible human being that God plucked out of obscurity and brought into the life of this child, Winston Churchill, when he was literally in the cradle. She formed that inner being. She was the one who built that inner structure and character in the child, and later on the teenager. She left him. Actually, was fired by the family when she was when Churchill was 17. But she poured the Word of God into him. She poured a love for the Lord into him, and an understanding of providential history. She was what we call a positive influence. Everything she poured into him was positive, and the outcome was positive. His father, on the other hand, and this is one of the most interesting features of the workshop and the presentations we do, his father was negative positive. His father poured extremely negative inputs into Winston Churchill. Churchill would have had no confidence at all if all he had was Randolph Churchill in his life. But Churchill himself made a decision, and this is crucial for all of us. We have to decide what we're going to do about the negative influences in our lives. We can mourn, we can be bitter, we can be the wounded child, we can manipulate people, we can do all those things all through our lives, or we can choose to see the positive and gain the strengths that dealing with those negative situations produced. And that's what happened to Winston Churchill.
Amazing. So coming back to the making of a leader, if you look at Winston Churchill, God orchestrated his making into a good leader, right?
There is no question about that. And God ordained that he would be in leadership. He is a living proof of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that God has chosen the weak things of the world, the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And that's exactly what happened. Churchill also possessed a kind of a childlikeness, his wit, his humor. You can see that many times in that wit, excuse me, and humor. And so that was all used. But God built that, and he put the people in Churchill's life and the circumstances that would bring all of those qualities into fruitfulness.
Wallace, our culture today, especially in the middle of this election cycle, we are starving for godly leadership. If someone was to go through this presentation, how do you help them qualify what may be a calling on their life to move into righteous leadership?
The calling must focus on vision. Must focus on vision. I was just watching your newscast and the quotes from Donald Trump about no vision after the collapse of communism. And this is one of the areas where I really agree with Trump. George H.W. Bush always said, I have problems with that vision thing. And he was the guy who was president at the Reagan, of course, precipitated the collapse of the Soviet Union. And George H.W. Bush was the one who should have brought that leadership, that visionary leadership. So vision is crucial. What do you have a passion that you're ready to die for? What is the passion that compels your life? And every single human being has that. Now, there's a 5-stage advance, or we call it a leadership ascent, that everyone will pass through in that route. And we spent an entire session on this. First of all is hubris. Almost every leader begins with hubris. Watch the elections right now. Watch the campaigning right now. I have arrived. Things are going to be great. The world is going to be changed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the second stage, or in that advance to true leadership, is humiliation. You get out there, you've made all these great comments, all these wonderful promises, and you fall flat on your face. And we trace that in Churchill's experience. Wow, it is so clear in his experience. The third and the most important facet of this advance to leadership effectiveness is honesty. Honesty. What caused the humiliation that deflated your hubris? what brought this about? What in your character, what in your responses brought this about? You have to be self-honest, brutally self-honest. And then the fourth in the ascent to leadership effectiveness is honing. What do I need to do differently? What skills do I need to improve? What do I need to gain in my life? And then finally, all of this comes together to produce hope. Hope for my future of leadership, hope for those I lead, and makes me a person who can convey hope. But this is the ascent of leadership, and Churchill went through each one of those steps, which we show so clearly.
All right, let me take a break here, Wallace. We come back. I want to come back to the humiliation part. We don't see a whole lot of humility in this race. And it does concern me. I think we are looking for the broken and contrite spirit. We're not seeing it. Maybe we've got to look to it in the church. But how did Churchill handle humiliation? We'll be right back. Wallace Henley's with us. And again, the book. It is a must get and a must read. There's a picture of it there on the screen. I tell you this, I've given these books out. Our whole board has read this book and keeps reading it. Called God and Churchill. It's a must get. And you can go to Wallace at wallacehenley.com and correspond with him there. But look for it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or at the Christian bookstores and get a copy of it, God and Churchill. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back, and what a delight to have with us today our good friend Wallace Henley. Wallace is a remarkable guy. Served in the White House under the Nixon administration and under the direction and the auspices of the late Chuck Colson. He writes for the Christian Post. He's authored great books, and you need to get the Globequake book if you haven't had that one. Read it. I think he takes the times in which we live and puts them into perspective. The latest book is, he's co-author of a book with Winston Churchill's great-grandson, and that is God and Churchill. What an incredible book. And out of that now is coming a teaching series on leadership. Lead like Churchill. You know, I find it interesting, Wallace, you probably have seen this in the news, but the last couple of weeks, some of the PMs in Britain are a little ticked off at Obama because the day he took office, he sent the bust of Winston Churchill back. That was pretty much a slap in the face, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And it reflected Obama's progressivist, leftist worldview perfectly. He saw Churchill as an imperialist, a colonizer. Churchill's whole attitude about the colonies, and I certainly don't support any bad things that happened during that era, but his whole point was that the whole world needed what he called a certain way of life that accompanied Christian civilization. Those are his terms. And he thought that this would bring blessing, this would bring prosperity, it would bring security, it would bring freedom. Obviously, there were people who abused that, but that was Churchill's vision.
All right, I want to come back to humiliation. Publicly, he was humiliated deeply, but he responded. He came back. What do you think the factor there was?
Well, that of course happened many times. The first and the most graphic and the most memorable, 1911, he's appointed First Lord of the Admiralty by Prime Minister Asquith, and they're up in Scotland near Edinburgh playing golf, and they're along the Firth of Forth, that great waterway that enters from the North Sea into Scotland. And Asquith calls him into his chambers and he says, I want you to lead the Navy. I want you to be First Lord of the Admiralty. Why, this was a truly hubristic moment for Churchill. He leaves that room where Asquith is, goes to his lodgings. He looks out on the Firth of Forth and he sees a couple of British battleships steaming along in all of their glory, and he says, wow, this is mine, this is mine. But in 1916, he is charged with the greatest defeat perhaps in the history of the British Navy at a place called Gallipoli in the Dardanelles between Turkey and Greece. and thousands and thousands of people die. He's booted out of the Admiralty, and he was not completely to blame for that. There were many others who participated in that decision, but all the blame went on Churchill. So he comes out, and instead of going and nursing his wounds somewhere, he volunteers to go to the front in the army in France. And he fights there in the trenches alongside common soldiers. He's given a command of a unit, but he fights there in those trenches. And so instead of accepting, instead of nurturing his own wounds, he thinks about how he can go forward and what kind of contribution he can make. That's the leadership distinctive.
All right. So what's the lesson there? When we've made a mistake, we get knocked down. A lot of people will stay there, but what's the lesson there about getting up and going on?
Well, the lesson is this: we have three choices. We can either live in denial, it didn't happen, which will lead us ultimately into a disassociation, a divorce from reality. Secondly, we become embittered, and we take that into all of our lives. Or thirdly, we can see this event, this humiliating event, in light of a much larger passion, a much larger vision, and we will say, well, this event is going to propel me in a different direction, and I will make the best contribution I can, even if it means going into the mud, going from the mountaintop down into a trench in World War I. Wherever I can step in and make that contribution, I will do it, no matter how small the role.
Wonderful. All right. So, by the way, as you progress across the country doing this, how do people call you or get a hold of you through your website to see if they want you to come to their church to present this?
Yes, sir. They contact me directly, Wallace at wallacehenley.com. We have all kinds of formats at Southern California a few weeks ago. We did 4 presentations. We can do 3. We can do 2. Jonathan and I can come together, or we can come individually, depending on a church's desire and its budget.
Okay. Again, that's Wallace at wallacehenley.com. All right, Wallace, let me slip you over. What's your take? I mean, do you think this is pretty much cut and dry now? It's going to be Hillary and Trump?
I would not predict that necessarily, although everything tends in that direction. It would be catastrophic, I think, at this point, if there were a change that would totally and completely destroy any hopes for a conservative ticket, as conservative as we have. I'm not sure we have any true conservatives, classically so, in the race. Maybe Cruz is, but nevertheless, everything in American politics now, because of Obama primarily, has become reactive. It has become nationalistic. It's become populist. And to understand, to confuse that with conservatism is to make a real mistake. So I'm not sure that we have that kind of conservatism that many of us would like to see, constitutional conservatism. I think we have pragmatics. And I think that's the only way that the ticket could be changed. If someone said, well, this approach will work better than that approach with this candidate, then somehow we'll engineer this. Really, Cruz and Trump are both anti-establishment candidates, and they're ripping the establishments apart, which is a delight for many people to see. And so the establishment will have to pull a real rabbit out of a hat to change the direction of things right now.
What did you think of your Texas there, of Senator Cruz's announcement with Carly Fiorina yesterday?
Well, personally, I was very happy about it. I think Carly Fiorina is a tremendous person, and I think she made a lot of sense in the debates. I think she was so classy. I would sure love to see her sitting at the table with the Iranian negotiators instead of John Kerry. I would sure like to see her as vice president instead of Joe Biden. I would, in fact, love to see her as president. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. So I was excited about it.
Oh, good. All right, so Judge Napolitano thinks that Hillary, in spite of all this that's going on, that she will, a recommendation will come from the FBI for an indictment. The president will pardon her, and that probably will send the FBI into a tailspin, and there'll be massive resignations in order to protect their integrity. Can the country handle this at the last minute going into November?
I think the establishments will see to it that the country walks where the establishments want it to walk. And by the establishments, I mean the 5 essential consensus-setting establishments: the entertainment establishment, the information establishment, the academic establishment, the political establishment, and the corporate establishment. Those establishments will determine how the nation views what is happening, and they can put a spin on it for all of that mass of non-thinking, non-ideological voters. They will be able to control that outcome, and they will be able to mute any negative outpouring from that.
Well, if there's ever a time we need a Churchill in America, it's now. Some would say, wow, it's too bad that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu isn't an American. We would elect him. I mean, we need somebody of that character to lead this country. What's your hopes, man?
Well, if we can't resurrect Churchill, maybe we can resurrect Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she would make a pretty good president, too. I'd vote for her in 2 seconds. The fact is, the reality is, as we've talked about many times on this program, the whole of history is about the advance of the kingdom of God. That's the whole point. Matthew 24:14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all of the world as a witness to all the ethnes, all the people groups, all the nations, and then the end, the telos, the purpose of all things will come. That's the whole point of history. That's the providential view of history. So God is orchestrating all of that. This is what Churchill understood, not maybe theologically intricately, but he understood it broadly, had an intuitive sense about it. And so God is intervening. So we've got to pray as we've never prayed before as the church. That's where we do our voting. We do our voting in the heavenly legislature. And we are, as the remnant people, the representatives on this earth to call down, to vote for what we want God to do in this world. And so we cooperate with him in that. That's why we've been put here. Nevertheless, it's up to God. And whatever happens, we must receive as God using and rejoice in God moving his kingdom forward. It's all about the kingdom, and that's what we have to see.
Well, 1 week from today is the National Day of Prayer. I hope America finds itself on its face before God, asking for his favor and his forgiveness.
Yes, absolutely.
One other thing before I let you go, Wallace. There seemed to be a part about Winston Churchill that was unique, and you see this in other leaders. They have an ability to assess the times and make a decision and move forward even though it's not popular. They seem to have a very much focused attention on doing something, even though their advisors say don't do it. They did it anyway, and they were proven right. What was that in Winston Churchill?
Well, one of the things in Winston Churchill was the fact that he understood who Hitler was. He knew who Hitler was, and he knew who he was in contrast to Hitler and the Nazis. And so therefore, he had a principled approach to his leadership. And the principled approach, rather than strictly the pragmatic approach, is what compelled him to keep going. If pragmatics had ruled, he would have never tried to mobilize Britain against this overwhelming force. He would have been like Lord Halifax, the foreign minister, who said, I don't want to be prime minister because I don't want to turn over the keys of London to Adolf Hitler. Churchill was principled, and in spite of the force, he moved forward.
Well, thank you, my friend. As always, you're an inspiration, and I think we're going to have to get together and have you come up and do the presentation in Medford, Oregon. And by the way, you do need a break from this. The salmon are running, and the river's full of them.
Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear it.
Thanks, brother. Talk to you again soon.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back.